Well, for our cross-industry panel discussion on cyber security trends for enterprises in 2020, we're looking at covering creating effective endpoint security strategies, cyber threat management, establishing zero trust security framework to protect enterprise data, and the impact of coronavirus on cybersecurity. For this, we've got our speakers. First up, Ezekiel Mukanga, the head of information technology, Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. Ezekiel was instrumental on the automated trading project as well as on the debt market project. Prior to joining ZSC, Ezekiel worked as a senior systems engineer with 7Cs Technology Kenya, as well as the consultant with the 23rd Century Systems, and has done ICT projects in Kenya, Zambia, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe. We also have Hisham Mohamed Ali, Chief Information Security Officer, Emirates NBD, Egypt. Hisham is ITU cybersecurity expert, UN organization member in blockchain committees, Central Bank of Egypt, CBE, public speaker, blockchain expert, fintech expert, IoT expert. Hisham has achieved 4 global awards: CISO of the Year, Arab Security Conference 2018, CISO of the Year at the IDC 2019, CISO Rising Star Arab Security Conference 2019. Hisham also delivers cybersecurity trainings on different occasions and events. Also, we have Peter Hunguru, the Head of Information, Communication and Technology, Zimbabwe National Road Administration, Zimbabwe. Peter is a holder of Masters in Business Administration from the National and University of Science and Technology, amongst several industry-wide certification and accreditations from PMI, Cisco, ITIL, and Oracle, amongst several other vendors. Peter has 12 plus years in the ICT industry with a proven track record in delivering systems, automation, project management, cybersecurity, and digital transformation. We also have Fahim Ali, the Chief Risk Officer, Musoni, Kenya, joining us. Fahim, an expert of digital transformation and financial inclusion, risk compliance, and internal controls. With 13 years of experience, his expertise includes formulation of strategic plan, drive digital innovation and transformation amongst businesses for inclusion of finance, qualitative market research, and data analytics to understand customers' need, scoping and segmentation, product development, institutional diagnostics, channel design, process re-engineering, and trainings. This entire panel discussion is going to be moderated by Daniel Adaramola, the Chief Information Security Officer, Unity Bank PLC, Nigeria. Well, Daniel, in the last 10 years, has been responsible for strategy formulation and security assurance for 3 different financial institutions and 1 PSP. Span of responsibilities over 6 countries, 20 million plus global clients, a total of $120 million US in USD in annual revenue, and combined assets of over $600 million. So over to the incredible panel, and thank you so much for all of you to join us. Daniel, over to you for moderating it further. Requesting you to kindly unmute yourself, please.
Okay, all right, Ivana. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes, you are, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivana. Thank you for the kind introduction and also doing justice to the presentation so far. You're doing a fantastic work. Thank you so much. And also to our audience globally, I understand that we have participants from all over Africa. That's quite impressive. So I'm reaching you on behalf of my esteemed co-panelists, everyone from Accra, Ghana, everyone from Joburg in South Africa, from Zimbabwe, we're reaching you especially. I also understand that we have participants from India, from Malaysia, from Saudi Arabia, and Oman. Thank you so much for joining. So we plan to make this as rich as possible, as interactive as possible. It's going to be a knowledge session. The gentlemen, I have on the panel, they come with several years of experience, so they're going to bring their experience to the fore, and we will do justice to the topic. So the topic we are discussing today is about cybersecurity trend for the enterprise in 2020. I would like to say 2020 and beyond because the world is fast transforming by reason of cybersecurity. So I would just allow each of my esteemed co-panelists to just say a word about their expectation about this discussion. I will start from Peter. What are your expectations for this discussion? Just in 30 seconds.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the Cybersecurity Summit. I think my expectations really is for 2020 and beyond, as you have exactly said, because these hackers, threats are with us and they are here to stay. We need to have a strategy to ensure that we protect our enterprise environments. That's my expectation.
That's very super. And you know, one of the things that we're doing more in Africa today is we're collaborating more. And that's the idea of this session, where we have, you know, experienced people like you and the other gentlemen on this call to share from their experience and, you know, see how we can move forward. So, Hisham, 30 seconds, what are your expectations, please?
Thanks, Daniel. This is a very important topic, and as you mentioned, as our threats are getting more and more sophisticated these days, so how to be more collaborative and how to share the knowledge and information between our sides in order to be proactive and to have some precaution measures and to change our mentality and our strategy from reactive to a proactive security approach. This mandates for us to be more collaborative and to share the knowledge between all the countries in Africa. So this is my expectation regarding this session today. Thank you.
That's super. You know, you mentioned something about changing behavior. And that's one of the things that, you know, a conference like this do. After the discussion, beyond just the knowledge, there's some culture change you may want to imbibe. And that's very important. Thank you so much, Hisham. I'll hand over to Fahim. Just in 30 seconds, what are your expectations for this, please?
Thank you, my captain. It's a wonderful event today, and I think that the overall expectations from this sessions is quite different from all of us. You see, after the world is after the virus, the world will be quite different, and whether the pandemic does last weeks, I hope it will be not years, and everything will remain, you know, unchanged in this COVID-19. And how we start with this coronavirus, with the customers' demand, the customers' demands are changing again and again, which also comes with risk. And the risk always being discussed in the number of areas, which is, you know, cloud risk, cloud security risk, endpoint risk. So definitely we will discuss more on this panel discussions. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Fahim. Thank you so much for that brief. I appreciate your, you know, your view of it. Thank you so much. So Ezekiel, how are you doing? Good to see you. So tell us in 10 seconds, what are your expectations?
I think where we are as Africa is we want to have solutions. And I think when we speak of solutions as a continent, we are looking at this cyber threats and the cyber risks that are so true and real. And I think from this same session and from this panel, I think we'll be able to share solutions which we can actually implement in our different situations and environments and make the world more secure in terms of computer equipment and stationery and everything that has to do with the environment. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Ezekiel. You know, somebody was asking me a question. He said, from my perspective, in the life cycle of people, process, and technology, which one do I consider the most important when it comes to cybersecurity? And in my opinion, and I feel people, because without the people, you can't power the technology. Without the people, you can't run the process. And that's why that collective knowledge that we all share together, it makes a great deal, you know, in advancing cybersecurity in Africa. So I welcome you all again and thank you. We're going to make this as rich as possible, as interesting as possible, and interactive as possible. So I want to ask the audience, as we make the discussion, if you have questions, we're going to take some of your questions. Just send it through the chat line. We'll be happy to take some of them along the line of our discussion. All right, so I'll go to the discussion area now. we have four major discussion areas. The first one is around endpoint security, because we're talking about cybersecurity trend for the enterprise in 2020 and beyond. So we're going to be looking at endpoint security. Also, we'll talk about cyber threat management. How do we enable early identification of threats? I think that's actually very key. That's a proactive way to cybersecurity, not just reactive. How do you enable early identification of threats? The second area has to do with zero trust. You agree with me that we have a borderless enterprise today. Data is everywhere. Somebody said data is pervasive. So that's why that element is actually very key in our discussion today. And lastly, we will look at post-COVID-19 impact of COVID-19 pandemic on cybersecurity. So that's the four areas we're going to be looking at today, and we expect it's going to be very interactive. So I will go straight to the first question, which borders around endpoint security. Now the question is this: what challenge would you consider the most pressing for the security of endpoints? There are several risks around endpoints. From your view, what is the most pressing when it comes to endpoint security? And by the way, endpoints are not just only your laptop. Endpoints is not only your desktop. Endpoint includes the mobile application that we use on a day-to-day basis. Endpoint includes the IoT device that gets connected on the internet. The endpoint could include the cameras that you have, so those are endpoints. So the question is, what challenge would you consider the most pressing for security of endpoints, considering the threat to privacy, data everywhere, last mile connectivity, man-in-the-middle risk, and also vulnerabilities? So I will leave it to my esteemed panelists to share their view. Anybody that wants to take a point will start.
Well, I can start from my point of view. As you said, Daniel, the most challenging part that we are considering that endpoints are especially concentrated on desktops and laptops and computers. But unfortunately, endpoints are getting more and more sophisticated these days, especially in IoT environment or Internet of Things. This industry or these devices, when all the manufacturers are getting to Internet of Things or getting to transform their devices into digitalization or into connecting to the internet, they didn't take into consideration the part of cybersecurity. So these are the weakest points now for endpoint management. And unfortunately, from our security strategy or from our security implementation, we usually concentrate our effort and our security effort on how to secure our endpoints in terms of laptops and desktops. And we didn't take these parts like printers, like the IoT, as you said, like the mobiles, like we are doing now some sort of bring your own devices policy. So how to secure these parts. So this is my point of view regarding the endpoint management and the endpoint security. I'm not going through how to apply endpoint security on traditional devices. We may all know how to apply these security maturity level, but we should take into consideration in the next few years how to expand our knowledge into the endpoint in terms of all the devices that are we dealing with. Thank you.
That's super. Let me ask Fahim, concerning the issue of privacy, what do you think? Should that be, is that a major challenge? Fahim?
Well, can I take that as well? Maybe to add on to the discussion? Okay, I think in terms of privacy and the issues to do with endpoint security, I think this is more of an individual. It's the people that really play the most important role. Because when we speak of these are devices, endpoint devices, be it mobile, be it desktops, be it laptops, be it MacBooks, or whatever it is, I think the first level of security has to be around the individual, the person, people, because we are speaking of login credentials, the sharing of passwords, things to do with how sensitive data is handled by an individual at personal level. So you find that processes and procedures all come through to support the individual. And I think that one of the most important things is that the people have to have the knowledge and they have to be aware the risks that are available, how to handle them, mitigate them, prevent, or even how we can minimize the effects on them. So I think people play a very pivotal role in endpoint devices. Those are my submissions, Daniel.
You know, you have a very good point, because a colleague of mine, a senior colleague of mine in the industry, was asking me a question. Now that we have our laptops being used all around in the coffee shop, at home, and all of that, should we now restart, you know, a different level of education from the end user? And that's very pertinent what you mentioned. People are actually very key in that chain. That's very key. Any other thoughts from my esteemed panelists on the endpoint security? Any other person?
Let me say something, Peter. Sorry,
okay.
Daniel, let me say something. Okay, so I think that endpoint security first comes with the recent development, especially on the how to maintain, first of all, the endpoint security once the staff are working remotely, especially in this period of time. So as an organization, first of all, what exactly they need to do, especially on the endpoint security. Number one, do they need to establish the cybersecurity policy where the endpoints will be the basic areas? Set up the 2FA, the two-factor authentication, use of VPN once they are working from home, setup of the firewalls at the machines, or use of the antivirus softwares. How they are taking the backups, because even if it is, you know, the securities will be breached, how they will maintain the backup once they are working from home, especially their employees. Lock out the phishing emails, you know, the sites, as we have discussed in the before also, how the phishing emails are attracting, you know, as in the major area on endpoint security. And the encrypted communication, this is also number one area where the cybersecurity people and the risk people actually need to focus more. Now let me ask also from the other people, as all of these areas, are we ready on this one? I'm sure the answers will be very few. And now imagine this endpoint security, how risky it is at the end user point. And this is what we really need to work, because the data which we are using at the cloud or even at the site is the key area which we need to all focus. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. That's a good insight into it. It's very key, because that's where really it starts from. You know, we use the endpoint to connect to the internet, and that same endpoint connects to the service. It's quite important that the endpoint security be maintained. But what's your view about endpoint vulnerabilities, given the fact that things like IoT cameras, they don't operate like your desktop, mobile also, because today we're having more of mobile, you know, gaps. So what's your view about mobile and also IoT device when it comes to vulnerabilities? What's your view about it? Anybody can take it.
Yeah, okay, Daniel, for that, I think I also have to add on to what Fahim has said. You realize that previously, all our things were in the network perimeter. Our threats were coming from outside. So it was easier to just protect our internal infrastructure, because all the endpoints were in the internal network. But now you're talking about the IoTs, and that's where the vulnerability is coming from. It's different manufacturers, and the speed of them producing and implementing those devices. And then the lagging of the security aspect is very, very worrying. It's really a worrying trend. Previously, with the manufacturers, you would have your patch management intact, and you would patch those to correspond with the risks that are in the environment. But right now, it's really difficult to keep up. But then what Fahim has said, you have to implement those encryption, those two-factor authentication to ensure that at least you have that, that protection. So I think that is my submission, that you have to really hammer the point that the users have to ensure that they use logins, they don't share passwords, the communication is encrypted. If it's a VPN, you encrypt that communication links. I think without those things, it will be difficult to really say you're 100% safe.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, Fahim. Thank you, Ezekiel. Your view on that is fantastic. You mentioned two-factor authentication and encryption. Those are actually key when it comes to the front end, and I believe that users they're taking home something important in that respect. So I will go to the next question. The next question has to do with cyber threat management. Now I have statistics here, and this coming from Checkpoint. I'm sure we all know Checkpoint. Checkpoint is one of the global provider when it comes to mobile cloud security. Now, based on Checkpoint's intelligence, Checkpoint actually mentioned that on the average, every week, an African, organization, okay, let me put it the way they mention it. An organization in Africa is being attacked on the average 1,202 times per week. On the average, every week. And they go ahead to mention that 66% of malicious files in Africa were delivered via email. So my question is, what is the place of cyber threat management, that is early detection of threats? How can we leverage that to actually, reduce our attack surface, be more proactive when it comes to cybersecurity? What's your view of cyber threat management? Anybody from the panel is free to take this.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So what comes to mind, or my views on this, is there are two issues to these things, two main keys. It's either you're going to prevent or you're going to detect. And what comes first is always an issue which has to be looked at. So when I look at what we can do is, I think it comes back to monitoring. Basic monitoring. It comes back to the important facets like user training and user management. You spoke about email that may come through carrying viruses and stuff like that, and upon downloading, you can actually install malware that can actually bring down the entire system, or even they can end up even calling for ransomware. I was reading over the last 2 days ago. It's quite worrying that one of the biggest exchanges in the world is actually down for the past 3 days. There is denial of service. They cannot function. It's so big, and all the CISO or the heads of ITs are saying is that this is something that we're looking at to tell you imminently when the solution comes through. And you tend to think deep, and you try to look at the practical solutions, and whereby we, as an institution, or maybe in Africa as such, we're supposed to be looking at solutions to mitigate, to reduce, to prevent, and at least to detect these attacks before they come on board. So I think it's more on how we handle these things, how we look at them, and how we address them. So that's what comes to mind, and maybe my fellow panelists can also add on to this.
That's true. The life cycle of monitoring, detection, and prevention actually very key. So let me ask others, what's your thoughts about cyber threat management, early detection? Anybody else? Your view of it? How do we prevent early or detect early, more like?
Daniel, regarding this part, also I need to tackle it from other point of view. Threat management is very important now because, as we mentioned in the session from the beginning, as we may know that all the attacks are getting now more and more sophisticated. And by the way, from the attackers themselves, they are sharing the knowledge between the attackers each other. So sharing the knowledge between us, it's now a mandatory because the attacks are getting more and more in a sophistication level, as I said. And other part we need to think about it is how to think about using the new trending technologies that we hear about in terms of threat intelligence and threat prevention. For example, we can use artificial intelligence and machine learning to enrich our fraud prevention solutions, for example. We can use some sort of trending technologies like blockchain in securing the transaction. As per, I'm from financial background, by the way, so this part can be handled from the encryption algorithms that are using blockchain. So we need to change our mentality. We need to change the way we think. We need to think some sort of proactive, as my colleagues said, because that's how to prevent and minimize the attacks that we are dealing nowadays. Thank you.
That's super, Hisham. Thank you so much. New technology is actually very key. I mean, gone are the days when we're talking about signature-based malware control. You know, cybersecurity has gone past that. You know, we're looking at heuristics, AI, to actually, you know, learn about the environment and ensure that we have the best when it comes to early detection. But lastly, still around cyber threat management, really, are there any best practices you've seen when it comes to data-driven awareness of cyber threat, where we're leveraging data to actually provide effective early detection and prevention? Maybe you have use cases, particular use cases, experience that you've seen. Anybody can take this. Data-driven, in which we're leveraging data, you know, to ensure. I mean, there are several platforms, you know, for a reason of not marketing for them. There are several platforms in which, you know, we use data, global threat intelligence platform. Maybe you have experience on your workplace or that you can provide. Anybody in that regard?
Daniel, it's very important at the first to know the data flow of our systems. Where is the data? Where is our data? We need to list all the places and all the systems that are storing or processing or transmitting our data. And this is a very important step for identifying where the threat will come from. Other issue, if we are dealing with any service providers or any third party, and there is a communication between us, it's very important also to test the encryption or the security maturity level that are happening between me and between the service provider or the third party. As I said, it's a defense in depth module. We have some sort of preventive controls and detective controls, and at the end of the day, we have some sort of information security governance translated into policies and procedures and network security. All these levels, when they are clear and when they are identified, this will help the threat management process to be smooth and easy and to be applied very smoothly. Thank you.
Super, Hisham. Thank you so much. Nice one. So we'll go to the next question, the third question. We're talking about the next question relates to zero trust security. That means, how do we establish zero trust security framework? The question is, what is zero trust? Because you could, some of our participants could be wondering, they've heard about the term zero trust, zero trust. What really is zero trust? Okay, I will just give an overview of what zero trust security is. Zero trust security is an IT security model that requires strict identity verification for every person, device, services trying to access resources on the private network, regardless of whether they are sitting within the enterprise or outside the network perimeter. I'll take that again. Zero trust security is an IT security model that requires strict identity verification for every person, you know, every device. That means everything grabbing IP, services, trying to access resources on our private network, regardless of whether they're sitting within or outside the network perimeter. So my question is, given the fact that data is everywhere, so where is the perimeter? So how do we leverage zero trust, considering the threat of data is everywhere and the borderless enterprise? How do we protect enterprise data and prevent unauthorized access to the network? I'll leave the question open to my esteemed panelists. Quite interesting question.
Thank you, Daniel. Maybe I'll look into that. See, when you speak of zero trust, as the name says, we can't trust anyone in the network in terms of devices and everything. So what comes to mind now is to ensure that our firewalls are in place and they've got the latest patches and upgrades, and they're up to speed to be in terms of protection. You have to now authenticate everything, be it two-factor authentication. You think of things of items that are around VPNs. Whatever you're doing has to be private. The moment it becomes private, it means that there's some form of trust issues. You're trying to minimize so that it's a VPN and it's a private connection to where you're dialing into in terms of system. Things to do with encryptions come to play as well. The data has to be encrypted. Who is getting what? And the levels, the access levels, the domains themselves, the active directory, things to do of where there's accountability, who did what. We avoid non-repudiation at the end of the day. So we look at these whole things that I think are in zero trust. It's quite important to ensure that the framework really is robust and whatever is happening inside the network is authenticated in their trust and the trusted devices within the network. That what comes to mind.
That's very impressive, Ezekiel. Thank you so much for that view. That's super. Peter, what do you think?
Okay. For example, what we have already started implementing the zero trust architecture in our network is for every device that needs to access the network, we use its MAC address to authenticate it to our network. So any resource that a device requires on our firewalls and other security appliances, we ensure that it is authenticated using its MAC addresses and only accesses the resources that it should access. So we have already started implementing some of those zero trust architectures.
You know, that's quite impressive because you could use IP. The question is, you could have rogue IP, you could have some other device trying to, use the same IP. But question is, if you stamp it with the MAC address, it gives a second, layer identity. Coupled with the fact that, you're going beyond IP or MAC address, which is at the second layer, first layer in this case in the OSI model. You could include the fact that, okay, there's a service beyond that IP that needs to run. So if that service is not profiled to run based on your baseline, you don't trust it. Now, there's a user that runs that service, whether an interactive user or maybe an application. If that service or application is not meant to run, you don't allow it. So, and that's where the case of, first of all, baselining your environment comes in. One of the things I do in my environment is to ensure that security is done from the infrastructure level. Everything needs to be accounted for. There shouldn't be any rogue activity. Everything that is grabbing the network must have a profile. Without a profile in place, you ain't coming in. What's your view, Fahim?
Yes, I think let me give you the implementation areas of zero trust. The number one is that we need to first draft, or we need to first sit and do the architecture of the zero trust implementation. So the number one area is utilization or utilize micro segmentation in your network, which is more important. For example, like files living in the single data center, how it is going in the dozens or in the secure zones. The number two, I'm just going fast. The number two is actually the use multi-factors authentication. Now, two-factor authentication is fine, but in zero trust, you need to use multi-factor authentications to combine the zero trust, which is on more of your ATM cards, smart cards, mobile phones, pins, patrons, and all that. So, which is more secure, from the 2FA. Then again, your POLP, which is implementing the principle of least privilege. POLP, we always says how it will work. In the job, in the other words, it also says that privileging unnecessary or necessary, allowing the people. And validating all the endpoint security at the one end, and then allowing user to use it, or to secure your devices, especially verifying your devices in the areas of organization where the endpoints is securing all the internal or external, security requirements. Daniel?
You know, that's very interesting what you mentioned. You know, you mentioned something about segmentation. Even when you have a private network, which you consider secure, it's actually very important for you to still scope the environment. You know, for example, gone are the days in which, you know, we're having a flat network. It doesn't happen no more. Because even I run in the financial service sector, which I'm required to do PCI DSS. With a flat network, you're moving nowhere. So most organizations, particularly in the financial service sector, the minimum you could have when it comes to network segmentation, I mean, it depends on your environment. I particularly have several, because the environment that manages my management zone is different from the environment that manages my data zone. You understand? So what you mentioned, Farim, is actually very, very key. Thank you for that point. All right, so we go to the last question. Are there any other points on zero trust before we move ahead? All right, super. I will just move to the last point here. The last question has to do with post-COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on cybersecurity. Now, before we move to the last question, I'm sure we have questions. Bafana, are there questions from our esteemed audience? Are there any questions already coming in?
Daniel, currently I'm not seeing the questions, but I will request the audience to send it because we're just about to wrap up. So just allow me a minute. As of now on the Q&A, there aren't any, Daniel.
So we'll go to the last question. The last question I have here is on post-COVID-19, the impact of the pandemic on cybersecurity. So I'm going to ask each of my esteemed panelists, what's your view of the impact of the pandemic on cybersecurity? How has the response to COVID-19 increased cyber risk? I'll leave it for my panelists.
Okay,
Great question.
maybe I'll take that.
Yeah.
From your question, whether we have to face it post COVID-19, things are not going to be the same. I'll look more from a Zimbabwean context. So you realize that the issue of remote from home policies and the issues of working from home, we have never previously. So as a people, we now realize that there's need to ensure that security is implemented, because now we are going to be working from home and it's going to be real, and we are speaking of the processes, the procedures, the policies in place to ensure that this becomes secure. Now imagine now previously maybe somebody would have to come through to the office, maybe was making use of a desktop, who would know that the data is secure because it is in the office, it is in the secure location. Now maybe the data is now being handled on a mobile device, and this person may be using public transport. In Kenya, I know you call them matatu, and then maybe here we call them combis. Imagine that that device is stolen or is lost. And if these issues of cybersecurity are not carefully looked into, the next thing is we'll have information in the wrong hands. So these are the issues around this pandemic, and these are real issues, and we need to have solutions to them. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Ezekiel. Peter, Peter, Fahim, Hisham, any view? Just your view of post-COVID-19 in a minute or two.
This is a very important question, Daniel, because we are living in this current pandemic now. I think there is many factors that we need to take it into consideration now in our game. For example, as my colleague said, this is the biggest part in our planet now for working from home, for example. So what about working from home security? Are we applying all the security controls to ensure that we maintain same security maturity level since they are in their head office, like they have now in the home? The Wi-Fi security, for example, home Wi-Fi's are not having same security maturity level like in our enterprises. So how to mitigate something like that? Physical security part is also very important. From the other side, in the current pandemic, phishing attacks are massively increased. So how to deal with these phishing attacks? My colleagues mentioned the vulnerability management and the endpoint security, and all these parts will be managed by applying patches and applying security patches for the operating system and the third-party application. So are we able to deliver these security patches when our colleagues and our staff are working from home now with same speed and same connectivity? these questions need to be tackled. And as you said, Daniel, in the first part of the session, we will get back to the cornerstones of information security: people, process, and technology. And the most important part is definitely people. How to raise the awareness level for these staff, how to increase the security awareness and increase the learning curve for these staff. My advice is to deliver for them some sort of security tips for working from home on a regular basis, to have some sort of e-learning module to be applied in their homes. This will help us to bypass this current pandemic without any attacks and without any hacks. Thank you. Daniel, you are muted.
Daniel, you're on mute. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Okay, am I audible now? So sorry about that.
Yes.
Any last word from Peter or Fahim? Just in a minute, 60 seconds.
Okay, I think my contribution on the COVID-19, I think the real issue really comes down now to those phishing, ransomware, and malwares, because now there's easy entrance into our endpoints. Remember, people will be working from home, maybe the children will be downloading stuff for over the internet. So I think there's now a major threat. They are now vulnerable, those things. So it's a matter of then trying to come up with antivirus softwares, malware softwares, anti-malware softwares, I mean, to ensure that these are also protected.
Thank you so much. Fahim?
Yes, quickly. Yes, quickly, Daniel. I think largely it is covered, but I will just say that just see your core banking system, your DFAs, your digital field applications, which is tablets and all that the organizations are using. Because in this pandemic, people also use the government agencies to send the phishing, emails, malware attacks and all that, which you need to be very careful on this, attacks, so that you are covering more of your, cloud security, especially in this COVID. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, thank you. Vanna, are we allowed to take any questions, one or two questions from the audience?
Yeah. Daniel, I just received one more question from the Q&A tab, and we can take that. It's all about how does the organization and employees, private sector provider collaborate on issue of offering security as work from home continues? That's one question. Daniel, if you could direct that to your panel, please.
Okay, I'll take that again. I think I'm seeing the questions. How does the organization and employee private service provider collaborate on issues of offering security as work from home continues? That means collaboration from the organization and employee. So from the esteemed panelists, do you have an answer to that? Collaboration. How do we enhance collaboration from the organization and the employee private service provider? Ezekiel, do you have a thought on that?
In terms of organizations and employees, I think the collaboration is much of, the organization is an institute and the people, employees are individuals. So I think you cannot differentiate the two, because it is the employees that make up the organization. So there's need to come up with policies. You need to have procedure manuals. You need also to train the people on how best to access and make use of the organizational infrastructure. So I think in terms of this security, offering security from home, I think the organization can train the people. They can also install different mechanisms like antiviruses on endpoints to ensure that they are secure from first-level attacks, and also to give them the necessary credentials, be it maybe fingerprint, face recognition, to try and minimize and ensure that we try to be as secure as much as possible. Those are my submissions, Dan.
Okay, we need to end here. That's Ezekiel. Ezekiel is the head of IT Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. Ezekiel, thank you so much for your thoughts. And also on the call, of course, I have my good friend Hisham. Hisham is the CISO of the Emirates NPD in Egypt. Thank you, Hisham, for your views and contribution. And of course, to my friend from Kenya, that's Mr. Fahim. The gentleman, I like your background, very good background. All right, Fahim is the Chief Risk Officer of Musoni in Kenya, and also my good friend from Zimbabwe, Mr. Peter Hunguru. Peter Hunguru is the head of ICT in Zinara, Zimbabwe National Road Administration, and of course myself, Daniel Adaramola from Nigeria. I say thank you for your patience and for your time. I'm sure you consider this session a good learning point. Over to you, Babana.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our entire panel for joining us today.